then we'll get going. We had over 300 people register for this, which is really a testament to this conversation. I think people are really craving. So welcome if you're here, and if you're watching the replay, welcome. I'm glad you're taking the time to watch the replay. We'll get started here. It's 12:01, so let's go. I'm going to start with some chat expectations of just how we're going to use the chat. First of all, this is a space that I want to create for us together. If you've signed up for this webinar today, it's for a reason. Your heart is open. You're open to receiving this information. So let's keep it open and no trolling. Otherwise, I'm not going to stay. So stay muted for the most part. We might have some time at the end where we'll do some live questions in that sense, but stay muted for the most part. Use the chat, engage with it. If something one of the panelists is saying is really resonating with you, I want to hear it in the chat. Just be like, oh my gosh, yes, that's resonating, or that's bringing up a question for us. Let's see. Tag us in your social posts. You can find me on Instagram at Splendid Consulting. You can find Dia at Athena's Warehouse, and you can find Jacina at Tender. Which, how did you get that handle, Tender? That's a really good handle to have gotten, Jacina. So
I really had my friend at Instagram.
Okay. I see, like, every time I tag you in it, I have to check because I just think it's too good to be true that she got that handle. So she's at Tender. She got it. It's hers. And I want to talk about what you can do. So we're all here together. We're having this conversation in an hour, maybe a little bit longer. I want you to come from the place. I talk about a lot of this point of social action, like taking social action. And social action can be a myriad of things, okay? So take action in a way that feels safe and feels good. Stop and say something. I wrote this down in my notes. If you're part of a discussion or part of an email or part of a marketing campaign that starts to feel like it doesn't fit in this conversation of your values of ethical storytelling, I think there's a place to stop and say something. But I put in my notes, when you feel safely supported to do so. I know I've been in places before. I've been in conference rooms where I didn't feel safe to bring it up in that moment. So I'm going to give you that caveat of creating a safe space. And that might not mean right there in that moment, but that is finding the allies to support you to have that conversation. Sharing this discussion. This might be sharing the replay with a board member. This might be sharing a replay with some of your friends who you know support nonprofits. Could be anything. Your family, your parents, whoever. Share, share, share. Support our panelists. I know that you've seen that in some of our messaging, some of our reminder emails. Donate, follow, and share. As I said, we had over 300 people sign up for this. I was doing some fast math last night, and it was very exciting. If everybody just donated $10 to each of the organizations participating, that would make a massive impact, guys. And that was just $10. So I mean it. I'm going to have Courtney, as I do intros, drop in their information in the chat. I know that a lot of people on this work for other nonprofits, but there is nothing more beautiful in my world than other nonprofits supporting other nonprofits, okay? So she's gonna put that in the chat. Thank you, Courtney. And I wrote this down this morning in my journal, discovering blind spots. Where are our own blind spots? Sometimes we don't even know we have them. And I found in my initial conversation with Brianna, which I'll talk about in 1 second, and even in our Zooms with the panelists, of like, uncovering our own, what I didn't know, right? We're all going to leave likely discovering and contemplating some of those blind spots. So be open to that, whether it's personally, or it might be organizationally, or maybe you have a for-profit business. Like, where are you perhaps having a blind spot and have an opportunity to do better, or be different, okay? So all of that being said, all of our housekeeping, you might notice that Brianna from @Connecting the Cause isn't live with us today, okay? We are going to miss her. She unfortunately had to attend a funeral today. So absolutely, she needs to focus on that. She needs to focus on being with her loved ones, and we are sending her all of the love in the world. And we're with her today, and we're sending that to her. I want to tell you that Brianna basically was my internet friend on Instagram. And when I realized that she was in Atlanta, I DM'd her and I said, can we go have coffee? And she said, yes. And that was a few months ago. And we had one of those coffees that you blink and an hour went by. And it's like, you're still talking and you're still talking. We both are mothers of young children. And there was that amid the pandemic was just immediate connection. But she helped me start to unpack. Sterling was on the chat earlier, a question that Sterling asked me, this was months ago, this was on an Instagram challenge that I hosted. And he said, how do we talk about children? How do we talk about adults without tokenizing them? How do we do that in the nonprofit world? And the way he said it, in that moment, I received it in a way I hadn't before. And all I knew is I didn't know the answer, but I knew that this was a conversation that we needed to have. Another student on that call worked in foster care, and she said, yes. She said, in my world, we have the signs of the children that have said, I've been adopted after 360 days in foster care. She said, I don't like it. You know, she said, that child likely isn't really understanding the consent there. They're not really understanding what's going on. And the other thing that resonated in the place that I went after she said that is, why do we need that? Like, why do we need that as supporters? Like, why do I need to see that in order to take action, right? So that's what led to that. So that is really, I'm so grateful for Brianna for having that conversation, saying yes to this panel. I have a feeling this is a panel I would love to do on maybe a quarterly basis, and I would love to have her back when the time is right. But I want you to go follow her at Connecting the Cause, because I told her this in person. The way that she communicates on social media is magic. And when I told her that, I was like, you know, you're really good at what you do. And she sort of was like, what? And I'm like, no, it is effortless. She is, I think it's just innate in her, and what she's saying is like mic drop, mic drop, and it's beautiful. So go find her at Instagram at Connecting the Cause. Okay, so a little bit about me. You know me, you've gotten emails from me. I'm Christina Edwards. I'm your host, I'm your moderator today. So I'm going to be kind of leading the discussion, leading the questions, navigating through that with you. I'm the founder of Splendid Consulting. So I teach nonprofits and social impact businesses how to attract supporters, build community, and engage online. So you can imagine why this is deeply, deeply on my heart and mind. So that's what I do. You can find me at Splendid Consulting. I'm going to intro our amazing panelists that feel like I was asking them on a date, and they said yes, and it was a blind date. So thank you to Jacina Allman. She is the founder of the Tender Foundation, who got that amazing handle at Tender on Instagram. So Tender works to bridge the gap and provide safety net for single moms who are living on the margins in Atlanta. They provide financial assistance, be that rent, utilities, grocery store gift cards, and operating a diaper bank. They do an amazing work. And whenever I'm teaching any kind of marketing class about nonprofits, it's really, really hard for me to get through it without showing Tender as an example, as a standard of what to do. They do really brilliant work. And if you're at a loss on how to tell the stories of women and how to visually tell those stories and how to do it well, go to Tender. They do a great job. So welcome, Jacina.
I'm muted. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we got a cute little, we got Jacina's daughter. I hear her in the background being super cute.
I have a 4-year-old, so she will.
All good, all good. And then we have Dia Parker. She is the executive director of Athena's Warehouse. Athena's Warehouse is dedicated to the fight for equitable education for women, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. You can support Athena's Warehouse by going to athenaswarehouse.org, following them at Athena's Warehouse on Instagram. When I chatted with Dia Parker a few months ago, I asked her the question, what do you think more nonprofits should be doing? And I said, fill in the blank, more nonprofits should be blank. And she said, community led. And that was another one of those mic drop moments where I'm like, yes, why are, especially the larger nonprofits get, the further and further away it seems like their leadership gets from really not only serving the community, but being led by the community. So that was a moment where I was like, I have to bring Dia into my world. I adore her. And both of our panelists, when we met over Zoom, I'm like feverishly typing notes. So we're going to kick it off with both of you really defining, I think what we started with, defining what you think sort of the problem is. So defining what, when we say trauma porn, when we say poverty porn, what is it and why does it need to stop? And Jacina, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so for us, we work with single moms with children, and a lot of times, you know, we're all familiar with like being inundated with photos of folks living in poverty and third world countries, and like that's what we think of as poverty porn and trauma porn a lot of times. And so for me, when I think of that, that's like what's in my head. But also there's a way that you can portray, like what we do is we have like we set up a photo shoot with our moms, and it's just something that is special for them. And it's not, with COVID, we've been doing porch portraits. So we meet our moms outdoors at a safe distance, and it's just a special intimate portrait, and they get to keep those photos after and stuff like that. So that's like I know the opposite of it. And that's what I use to kind of define it. Is it a dignifying photo, or is it something that somebody's going to look back on and say, wait, that's not me, you know, like that's not who I am. That doesn't define me. And so that's what I think of when I think of like, what is poverty porn or what is trauma porn?
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, poverty porn and trauma porn are filmed from this lens of pity, this lens of look how horrible, you know, the situation is for this person, take pity on them and give us your money. And it's that intent that comes out so clear and is so disgusting to us, especially if you know, I myself, you know, the young women that we serve are at my high school's alma mater, you know, so we have collectively a background of poverty. So I'm not looking at them as these poor, disenfranchised youth, because I was that poor, disenfranchised youth. And folks talked about, you know, our cohort in that same manner, in that same light. And you're right, you know, having that dignity and empowerment be the lens that you want to use to film and photograph folks. You know, just think of it, if you were the subject matter of this photograph, of this conversation, how would you want to be portrayed? And it's simple questions like that we aren't asking ourselves as nonprofits, because of the savior complex, because of, you know, this one of the inherent natures of nonprofit business structure.
Yeah, I was thinking about, we were all probably, or at least I was, raised on the mailer that, you know, the large nonprofit sent with the shocking image of, you know, a malnourished child. And that was what was supposed to get our attention to take action. And I think many of us were just raised on like, that is nonprofits, that is nonprofit marketing, and that's how we get their attention. And when I Googled it, I was like, poverty porn, let's see what comes up. And it says it's used in media through visually miserable images in order to trigger some sort of emotion against its audience. And like, there are 1,000 other ways to do better. But I think it's unwinding to the people who expect that shocking image, because in some ways we've been brought up on that, on seeing and taking in those marketing images. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, you already mentioned it, Dia, a little bit, the savior complex. So it's a little bit of like one person's better than the other, and there is a little bit of, or a lot of bit of hierarchy, and how it shows up in nonprofit work. What are you seeing? And talk about that pressure that nonprofits almost have to lean into that dynamic, or resistance in getting away from it.
Yeah, so there is, you know, a lot of pressure. I definitely feel there's a lot of pressure on nonprofits, the executive directors, the fundraising teams and the development teams to, you know, take a lot, you know, a big picture and really, you know, kind of focus on one point and really convey clearly to their funders and their donors what the need is. And so it's really easy, especially because of, you know, the whole reason why nonprofits exist is because our government has failed to provide adequate services to people, but we don't view it that way. You know, they're just, you know, the way nonprofits, you know, came about is because of that lack of structure, that lack of infrastructure. But nonprofits don't view themselves that way. They view themselves as essential to society and as, you know, filling these gaps, which is necessary work. But there's this sense that, we have to have, there are tons of nonprofits, tons of executive directors who self-fund their foundations, right? So they are a wealthy benefactor that's just pumping money into the community to fill these gaps that local and state governments aren't fulfilling. And so there's this temptation that since you are the funder, since you have this power through wealth, that you come to own these stories as you get to know the community and the folks that you're working with. And there's pressure on nonprofits to move in a more corporate direction, right? So even if an organization starts out grassroots, they're strongly encouraged that in order to promote professionalism and to be bigger and to do greater things, they have to, get from local to national, regional, and grow and become an international organization. And in order to do that, they have to have a more corporate structure, which means they have to have a more business mindset, which kind of, results in this transactionary thinking that, you sell me your story and I will, I'll free you. And so it's that perspective that really promotes the savior complex. And I, will openly say that I also think that it's tied to some of the Judeo-Christian values that folks have when they're getting involved in nonprofits, when they're starting nonprofits. A lot of people are inspired by their religion to act on that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I grew up Seventh-day Adventist myself. It's a type of Christianity. And I still hold a lot of those same values, but, in that culture, in that, in Christianity, there is a savior. And people are trying to emulate that individual. And so I get that there are those pressures and stuff like that, and that it's cultural and that it's deeply rooted in the nature of nonprofits. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation to really shine some light on what the savior complex is and how it can harm folks.
I have some notes on that too. As Dia was saying, we have to interrogate the history of nonprofits, really. And when you look back, back in the 1920s when the YMCA was founded, all these orgs were being led by white women that were connected to wealthy families, right? So the work that they were doing and what they cared about, it was informed by their worldview. And I think that's still why, till this day, the nonprofit industry is overwhelmingly white-led. And I think it gets tricky when you start believing that you're your org is the only thing that can help, and the community you're helping without you wouldn't be okay, right? Believing that these folks need you to save them throws away the idea that if the community was equipped with the equal access and equal resources, that often we could, and we do, without access to these resources, create transformation in our own communities, right? And so the potential is limited by folks' outside perceptions and white privilege. And that's what I think really the savior complex is all about.
Yeah, I love what you brought up specifically about the foundational and kind of religious elements, Jacina, too. It's that's kind of what laid the foundation of this model. And there are several organizations I've worked with where we are trying to, I'm doing this with my hands, let go of the connection between the volunteers feeling like they need the volunteer activity, which ends up being like a mission trip, right? Because with COVID, there are less mission trips. And how do you release that and still say these people, these programs are still needing service, and there actually is a beautiful model in place here, and you can support them virtually. And then the volunteer going, but I want to participate over here, and realizing that's about the volunteer, you guys. That is about the volunteer taking, which I think you both said is that. And really, in a lot of my notes, what I've written down is there's internal. So there's the nonprofit from the internal point of top down, is our nonprofit community led? Are we perpetuating some of these stereotypes, right? in some of our communications. But then I think there's external, which is like, are our volunteers, are our supporters, are our donors expecting that? I was on a call recently where the donor said something to the extent of, a good thing about XYZ nonprofit is, that basically how most of it goes to the people in need, which is another way of saying how very poorly the people who work there are paid. And I'm like, no, let's unpack that. It's okay to provide people a better than living wage and. So it's like, it's starting to sort of unpack and parse out the educating our supporters too. So thank you for saying it in that way, because I think that helps to explain it. I do want to talk a little bit about these stereotypes that we see. So Dia, I know you mentioned on our initial call, I feel like talking about some of the words and language that perpetuate stereotypes. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've done inside your organization to create change?
Yeah, thanks. Like I said, the young women that we serve currently, and I, attended the same high school and come from the same like Chamblee, Brookhaven, Doraville area. And so, a good chunk of students there live in apartment complexes that were built in the 70s and 80s. They're in disrepair. And I myself, experienced, a brunt of the gentrification living there in 2015. When I was at Oglethorpe University, my family and I were displaced from the apartment complex that we lived in for 15 years, just due to gentrification. Brookhaven had recently become a city officially in 2012. The city was looking for ways to, make revenue. And one of those ways was attracting developers to come and build, right? To come and build luxury housing. So our apartment complex was torn down to be converted into luxury condos in 2015. And, at that time, I knew this was only going to continue. And so that was how I got into nonprofit work, because my bachelor's degree is actually in biology. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and that was the kind of service that I was going to give to the world. I did know that I wanted to, to serve my community, but I didn't know in what capacity. At the time, my mentor, who is the founder of Athena's Warehouse, B. Wynn, was running for office, House District 89, formerly Stacey Abrams' seat in our Georgia State House of Representatives. And that's how I got started doing volunteering and doing political work and stuff. And she was looking to transition out and, hand over the nonprofit to someone. And at that point, I'd had a little bit of nonprofit experience because my really, really great friends and I helped to start a nonprofit called Los Vecinos de Beaufort Highway. It means the neighbors of Beaufort Highway. It is primarily, led by the community for the community, and teaching folks their rights around immigrant rights, tenants' rights, and parent rights. So that folks know that they have the power to enact change for themselves. So in co-founding that and transitioning as the executive director of Athena's Warehouse in 2019, there was a lot of work to do. We used to refer to our youth participants without including our gender nonconforming and non-binary students. To be perfectly real with you, even as a queer woman of color, like, this is still the South, and there was that hesitation that, how will donors respond if we start talking about the fact that these are the students that we're serving? And at the time, we were still referring to the students, because this was really popular language, especially in 2010. All of the manuals, webinars, everything, if you were doing that stuff around nonprofit work in 2010, you would have seen them encouraging you to talk about your population as disenfranchised, as, literally saying, these were best practices, saying that these students were at risk, because of their ACEs and the correlations with poverty and certain outcomes, certain academic outcomes, calling, saying that they're at risk for teen pregnancy and drug abuse and alcohol abuse. This is the language that was encouraged, and this was the language that we used prior to myself becoming the executive director and bringing in a new board and a new team to really talk about and think through, you know, who we're serving and how, you know, if we want more me's, more youth who come back and serve and lead the organization, we can't keep talking about the youth in this way that really is, you know, disempowering. Is that a word? Yeah, so that was a main objective, to get us to stop, you know, talking about the youth that way.
And I think too, what that's bringing up is like being willing. And did you have these conversations with your board and your staff of like, we might, repel a few people in that sense of like, sometimes when our language is so broad, or when our language is 10-year-old language, like you said, in 2010, this is what we were doing. And that was the, you know, being willing to say, you know what, this is what we're using now, and this is what we're saying, and this is what we're not saying. And these are in line with our values, and we might ruffle a few feathers here, and that those feathers might be donors, and that's okay, right?
It's an ongoing conversation. You know, we never stop talking about the fact that, you know, in any conversation where you're talking about the risk and benefits of, you know, changing the language of your nonprofit, especially around the community and population that you serve, you are taking a big risk. And so there's not any time that someone isn't like, you know, when we do have those conversations, and it's ongoing. You know, it's not like we rewrote and adopted our mission statement in one day. You know, we're still working on making sure that what we say as our tagline, and what we say as our actual core mission statement, that, you know, those things line up and match. And it takes time. You know, I became the ED in 2019. It's 2021. We're just going to throw away 2020. So I've only been here for a year. And so it takes time to rework and reframe a lot of that work. Yeah.
Christina, how have you navigated through some of these complexities, especially as the founder of your organization? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we serve primarily single Black moms. I'm a single Black mom, and I got pregnant when I was 20. I was working at American Apparel. I have a note still saved in my phone how I was going to have a baby and support her with my American Apparel, like whatever that's called, a paycheck. I'm like, what is that called? A paycheck. And my rent was $300. And just a few months prior to finding out I was pregnant, I was asking my mom, like, can you send me $300 because I cannot pay my rent this month, you know? So coming from the same space as the moms that we serve, the only difference, like transparently, between the only reason where I have access to resources is because early in my first trimester of pregnancy, my daughter's dad found success in the music industry. He's a rapper, right? Like that's the only difference. Why could I was able to like change my whole OBGYN to a midwife and have like the delivery that I wanted, just because I suddenly had access to that type of care, right? Like I just had access to something that could have saved my life. My pregnancy is high risk. I have a blood disorder. So like that has been the only difference between the community we serve and me. And so coming from that background, it didn't feel fair to me, because like my friends who I got pregnant with, or my peers that we were both, or all of us were journeying into motherhood at the same time, it was like, something's off here. Suddenly I have access. And so my pregnancy and my motherhood journey looks different than my friends now, right? So that was what planted the seed for what we're doing now. And I have no background in this. I dropped out of, I had a baby at 20, y'all. So I didn't go to college. I dropped out. I have no background in this. It was just like, we're literally DIY, scrappy. We're learning as we go, but we've never had to like rewrite anything, because we've come into it with this like mindset and framework, because it's easy when it's you, right? I wouldn't talk about myself that way. So I'm definitely not going to talk about we think of them as our moms. So we're not going to talk about our moms that way, right? And what I've learned is that language is everything in storytelling, and it's removing, if you use language to like remove the onus from the individual, it's important, because most of the time, if you move the narrative towards why we even have to exist, why Tender even has to exist, you uncover that it's like because systemic barriers and inequality in access and resources. So that kind of removes the onus from our actual moms of like, how did they get there, to like, no, this is like a result of a broken system, you know? And that's what we've learned through this, is like that language is everything. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah. I think what you just said, what I heard was the oneness of leadership, board, you, and the people you serve, mamas. It's all one. And I would argue that that's very different than how a lot of nonprofits operate and I identify. And earlier we talked about that savior complex. When there's a oneness, like, and you just talked about, you're like, why can I have a midwife? This person can't. And shout out to having a midwife. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And yeah, like it is not a thing that everybody can have. And why? And when you have that oneness from the top down inside your organization, I do think it will start to come out through your messaging. Other thing is, because you didn't come from the nonprofit world, like that is your special sauce, because you didn't, because you weren't on this is how we do it, this is how appeals letters work, and this is how you do it. That is why I don't know your audience of your donors, but I'm going to argue your donor pool looks very different than most nonprofits, in the sense of like, they're probably younger. They're probably, right. It's because you're speaking to an audience that is like, yes, I've been waiting for a nonprofit to speak to me in this way. Yes, I've been waiting for someone. Same for Dia. It's like, yes, I'm non-binary. And finally, you're calling, this is a place for me. And when you're willing to do both of those things, people are listening and just waiting for that. But when you're like diluting your messaging, or when you're using these old school messages of, again, like that poverty porn or that trauma porn, a lot of people are not there for it. And it's not speaking to them. So that oneness is I want to talk a little bit about imagery a little bit, because how you walk through Justina specifically, talk to us a little bit more about your photo shoots with your mamas, because I think there are a lot of people who are watching this who are in a position where they're like, we have to tell the stories. Like I even am always like, tell the stories of impact, tell the stories of impact. You have to, everybody wants to hear it. How do you tell those stories of impact the way you told me you did it? No one's ever told me that they did it that way before, and it's beautiful. So I want to hear about it.
Well, I had no clue. Once again, I had no clue that we're doing.
I'm telling you, that is your superpower.
So for the first piece, I think if you're gonna like go and ask anybody to do anything for you, it's recognizing the power dynamic between the org. And we ask like moms that we've supported before, right? So recognizing that we have power in the situation because we've helped them. So they may already feel like a sense that they owe us, or they're also fearing that in the future, they might not be able to access our services if they say no. So like recognizing that power dynamic and calling it out when you make your ask is really important to us. We have like a template for making our asks to be in like our blog post or social media, because of those things. Like we want it to be clear that it's okay if you say no, right? It's okay. You don't have to at all participate in any of this.
If you don't want to be featured, you will not lose out on anything. You're in our family, you're in it, and it's all good. Yeah.
Exactly. And for the families that do actually agree, it was important to me that that they were compensated for that time, and that, you know, they're taking time out of their day to do something for us and to push forward our mission, right? So we offer $150 gift cards, and we send those over to our families who do interviews, photo shoots, etc. And so yeah, that's how our like blog, social media goes. We just want to make sure that it's something special to them and that they feel valued with doing it, and it's not just a take relationship, you know.
And when you, as a follower, like when you're on social media looking at their spotlights of their mamas, like there is a realness to it, and there is like a depth to it that I think you don't get in a lot of just normal nonprofit stories. So it's probably because you've set the foundation and the tone as being a two-way space, as being a safe space, as being something that they're excited for. They get to keep the photos too. And it just feels good. And when I say that's different, I mean, that is really different than a lot of nonprofits are doing it. A lot of nonprofits are not compensating the people for their time. They're not sharing the photos, those beautiful digital high-res copies. They're not giving those to them. And so that's a beautiful thing to set that tone and really lay that foundation again of like, we are all in this family together.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I love when our families are excited for our photo shoots and like they get, something special to them. So yeah, we just try to make it something special.
I mentioned this before, but I've worked with a lot of teenagers before. And anytime we take photos of teenagers or children in general, you have to have that photo release. And I think that was the old standard of like, we'll make sure you get consent from the parents. And what I want to challenge people today to say is make sure you get consent from the child. Because particularly you think of middle school and high schoolers, I've said to them before, like, do you want to do this? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes they're like, I don't want to be on social media. I don't want to be on your postcard. Now their parent might have signed the consent form, but giving it a space where it's like, no, and you're not in trouble. It's all good. I don't need this for an annual report. I don't need this for a social post. And a lot of times you'll have people who are like, oh my gosh, yes, I live my life on my phone and I would love to be in it. And that's great too. And like letting that be okay. And, whether you're hiring a photographer or whether you're the person taking the photo, just making sure that like you really mean it when you say it. Like, hey, do you want to be part of this shoot? Here's what it entails. Here's what it looks like. And if it's no, it's okay too. And Dia, I'd love to hear like kind of how you handle that, because you're actually dealing with kind of, I think of the age of like middle and high school, like, you're feeling all sorts of feelings on whether or not you want to be, have your image captured. So how do you handle that?
Absolutely. So we do the permission slips at the beginning of the semester. And we have two separate, we have a whole, like the general permissions, which does include some stuff about photo release, and then a whole separate one that is explicitly about, the length, because I see a question in the chat, the length of us keeping the photo, and goes through, the fact that, this could be on our social media. This could, be tied to a donor newsletter. Are you all right with that as a parent? And then, in those moments when we are taking, back when we were in the classroom, at the end of the session, if we had a good solid group left, or before a guest speaker gets started taking us through a workshop, we're like, okay, who wants to be in a quick group photo? All right, well, go stand over there, take a bathroom break if you don't want to be in the photo. And it's just that really simple stuff. And if someone's like super shy, we get great stories at the end that it's like, I didn't really, I started off the year, feeling uncomfortable, but later on, I wanted to be a part of it because I want to remember my time here. And then we also buy a page in the yearbook every year too. So they know that the photos are going to be in the yearbook. So if they want to see themselves in the yearbook, get in the photo. We did do some photo shoots in the past before my time. And I actually signed up for one as a past participant, and it was fun. We got to come back to campus, and the org had a professional photographer who was on the board. And we did like a video interview, and it was nice because it was an experience that I hadn't had before. I think it was my first time on camera. And we got to keep the photos, we got to keep the headshots. And at that point in time, it was, where everybody needs to have headshots these days, right? So, making sure that the students got a copy of their photos was something that was done then as well. And yeah, making it sound optional. You don't have to be in the photo if you don't want to be. Taking, just one student who is very outgoing and is 18, and can definitely just hop in a photo with the guest speaker. We do stuff like that as well. Yeah.
I wonder too of making some sort of policy where it's like the use won't be in perpetuity. Like somebody in the chat kind of, they said a 14-year-old might feel different at 17. It's like, yeah, like maybe the photos from this shoot is not going to serve as our brochure cover for the next 7 years, like something. So that person, I don't know. I mean, I know that I probably would get pushback even saying that, where you're like, Christina, we can't keep changing out the photo on the assets over and over again. But just thinking about that a little bit, or the homepage of the website where it's like, we're using the same photo of just, or checking in with the person. Maybe they're into it. Maybe they're like, I love it.
And that's the beauty of our org. So, since we centered around one high school, a lot of the students come back and volunteer for us. So if, we are using the same photo for 7 years, which we have done, we are kind of currently doing. Yeah. A lot of those students have come back as volunteers, and they're like, I hate this photo of me when I was 14, but every time I see it, it reminds me to volunteer and to donate and to come back. So I hate it, but I love it.
Navigating through that.
Yeah, it's cringe. There are photos of me on our website still when I was 17, and I'm like, oh God. But I'm gonna leave them. Because it makes for a great story. But it's still cringe. It's still cringe personally for me.
Listen, 17-year-old Christina would say the same thing. So I'm going to jump to a pre-submitted question from Maya that was about this topic of photography. So she says, our societal narrative around donating frequently exploits visceral images of poverty and inequality designed to engender sympathy and action for the cause. She says, I wonder how many people will feel compelled to take action by these extreme photos. And if we flip the script, that they're just excited, how do we get them excited to donate or volunteer from narratives that respect communities? They might think, why do you need my support? Things don't look so bad here. So the way she said it kind of packaged it up really well of like, okay, if we change and they're not so visceral, will our support decline? What do you think about that?
I can hop in. You want to go? I'll hop in. We've learned about something called the constructive narrative, and I was kind of speaking to it earlier, where it takes the onus off of the individual story and puts it more so on like, how did this system like end up here? And we learned that works because it allows your donors to see how you can move forward and like where you can create change, not only by helping us like do this groundwork of change, but also like in the policy advocacy space. This is where the root problem is. So this is where we also need to focus on, right? And so as we learn, we're just learning more about this. We've kind of been trying to put it more into play.
Yeah, and my question to that question is, do you really want their money? Like, do you want those people supporting you? How long are they going to continue to support you anyway? Eventually you will be forced to change because the younger generation will be the target audience, and they're not going to accept those old, stereotypes and terminology anymore. So it's just a matter of time before, as an organization, you have to move your marketing in this, social justice direction.
Yeah.
And it's hard because it's like, the org won't survive without funds, obviously. And saying no is really difficult, and a lot of development best practices are to never say no, to do whatever it is that's asked. to make this donor happy and to get them to donate again. But you know, you can always add in that education and pivot back to the root of the problem, and you know, really set those firm guidelines. You know, when we're looking at folks who have volunteered with us for over a decade now, and why they keep coming back, and why we can count on them every single year to run a workshop for us. You know, we're looking at a marketing persona of an individual who has a story that is very similar to the youth that we're trying to serve, right? So it's not difficult for our volunteers to buy into our mission or to understand why, you know, hey, you know, reaching out to students directly outside of this anonymous platform that our mentors and folks can reach out to students with. Reaching out to students outside of that is not okay. It's not hard for us to say that to our volunteers because of the relationship. And if you don't have a good relationship with the folks who, you know, are giving you money, if you don't understand their intentions, and if you suspect that their intentions are to get something back, whether that is to assuage their own guilt or to, you know, and you're using, you know, images of pity to help them assuage their guilt, then the whole thing is toxic. And it's going to just keep breeding more toxic outcomes. And it's going to be really difficult to ever have members of the community be in positions of leadership. If that is a goal of your organization, if that's something your organization ever wants to do, it's going to be really impossible if you're just doing whatever the donors want all the time. Yep.
Donor second mindset.
Say more.
We do like mama first, donor second. So basically when we're making like decisions in the org, we have a couple of touch points that are built in with our process to where we get like confidential anonymous feedback from our moms. And that's what we refer to when we make decisions. You know, it's not more so what does the people are giving us money, what do they want? It's more so the people we're supporting, what do they want and what's helpful for them? And so we think of it as mamas first, donors second. And like just having that short little thing like helps us stay within our like grounded within our values and stuff. When we're going to decide what are we doing or what are we going to say, that helps us stay like grounded within what we're doing.
I love that. That's like your internal motto, like keeping you in integrity, right, with those decisions.
Like self audit, you know.
Yes. It's one thing we talked about was, you know, my notes, the pity versus empathy, right? Of what will it take for a donor or somebody to volunteer or something like that, like that. Both of those could result. So like pity can drive you to taking action, right? Empathy can drive you to taking action. Like you can have a quote, same result, but on a decision tree, those are two very different emotions. And I think what Maya's question really was anchored in, what you two both spoke about, was like, do you want to create a culture where your organization is relying on pity among other emotions to engage action? And if the answer is no, like truly being willing to then again repel some people, right? Of like, no, we're not doing it this way anymore. And Jacina, you talked about the education piece. So I think if you haven't written this down, definitely write this down of like, well, how do we do it with how do we tell those stories in a way that's not tokenizing? How do we tell these stories that's empathic? And I think it's education of like, these are some of the problems that we are solving or that we are, you know, contributing to help women in need for, or whoever it is, without doing it in a way that feels like pity. Like another, I think one community that we see this a lot on, the pity versus empathy contrast, is homelessness. When there are nonprofits who serve communities experiencing homelessness, we see that a lot of like those images where there probably wasn't consent, or if it was, you know, I don't know, where it's it's drawing up that pity, or drawing up that moment of trauma porn to get someone to take action, and making the decision to stop doing that. But I think that then people are saying, well, how do we do it if we don't do that? And so then I think it goes back to the empowerment piece of like educating and empowering your audience. All right, we are going to move on to, let's see. Okay. Shannon asked this question. She said, how do you include volunteers and donors in marketing without turning them into saviors? So this is kind of the reverse of the impact point. So it's, instead of talking about the people who are benefiting, we're talking about, these are our volunteers, these are our donors, these are our super supporters. How do we do that in a way that isn't saying they're better, right? Or they are the savior here?
We have a new feature that we're going to be launching. It's called Mama Mondays. And this was kind of, how do we kind of grappling with that question? Like, how do we also thank our donors, but it's not, like, thanks for supporting us, but we're not positioning them higher than anybody. And so we came up with this idea of Mama Mondays, where every Monday we'll alternate between one of our moms and one of our donors, who, with our mission, typically always are moms as well, or know a mom, with a mom that supports us. And we've asked our moms and our donor moms the same 3 or 4 questions. And with that, it's a way to like humanize the moms that we support, and like bust any stereotypes and myths surrounding single motherhood, single Black motherhood, and also to be able to show like gratitude to our donor moms. And really, because the answers that we've been receiving are not too different from each other, so it's a way to really connect that everybody, like, we're all moms. And that's really what connects us all. And there's no difference between our motherhood and us as humans. So that was what we came up with as an answer to that. Like, how do we still show some love to the people that support us?
I love that. You said that we're all moms, and there's no difference between the moms that are donors and the moms that, I mean, like, everyone just received that for a minute, because that's really important. So that is related to your niche and sector, no matter what it is. Like, that translates for sure. Dia, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I think, as long as it's an empowering message, if, think through, the goals of why you're creating the materials in the first place. Are you trying to get more volunteers by highlighting a great volunteer? Are you trying to generate donors, donations by highlighting the work of the volunteer? If the volunteer is basically a staff member that isn't paid, which and they're giving a lot of their time, I think it's, they are kind of a hero. They have heroic qualities in that sense. And so it's going to be really difficult to just, throw that connotation out completely. But as long as it's, as long as you're not disenfranchising your own population by talking about and uplifting that volunteer and their work. And if the goal is to recruit more volunteers like that person, then you're really, clearly communicating to your audience, what your target market is for volunteerism. These are the hours that it takes to be a good volunteer with us. This is the, the maybe even the ethnic background of volunteers that we're trying to recruit. We want more volunteers who are Latina because we're serving a lot of Latinas. Like, that's okay messaging. If that's what you need, then it's okay to kind of put that out there. But yeah, it just shouldn't disenfranchise the community that you're serving. But it's good, if you're a nonprofit like us who are trying to uplift women, then we're still uplifting women when we give a shout out to our amazing volunteers.
Totally. You don't want to dilute your content so much that there's nothing, right? So yes, as long as it's still uplifting, I love that. That's a good distinction. We're going to move on to Gretchen. She pre-submitted a question, and y'all keep submitting questions in the chat because I'll go through those here in a second. She said, how can white folks best support the sharing of BIPOC stories without appropriating them? Just a light question for you.
For me, it's all about tone. Are you clearly saying that this is someone else's story? And do you really need to tell the person's story in order to get your goal across? So, as allies to any community, you need to constantly be asking yourself, what is my goal in this conversation? If you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone and you're trying to highlight, why you're really passionate about the nonprofit that you've been volunteering at, it might be appropriate to share a story, to share an experience that you heard during your time of service to the organization, especially if it's a private one-on-one conversation. And then, recapitulating any materials that the nonprofit is putting out, obviously, is, as long as they're, good materials, that's an okay thing to do too as an ally. So if the nonprofit, shares someone's story on social media, it's fine to reshare that story, but never, take ownership or put yourself in a position to where you are, speaking down about the narrative, which hopefully is not super difficult to do. But yeah, it's okay to share some stories, especially if you were directly involved in the progress.
Jacina, do you want to add to that?
I think Dia really knocked it out of the park. I was gonna say, is it necessary to even share, or if there's somebody that's better suited for that, are you really ready to share? Can you share your power? Are you ready to platform somebody else? And are you willing to do that? I think that's the next part of that is okay, why does it have to be you? Can you share that power with somebody? Can you share your resources with somebody else that is actually better to steward that story,
So we're going to move on to some of the live questions here. Let's see. So the first question is there a chance to be perceived as paying for the endorsement? And I feel like I'm not sure what that was in context to. So if that was your question, or
blog, I
okay,
think about our blog. And so when we were thinking about halfway through, we weren't paying for our blog post at first, and our photo shoots at first. And then about halfway through, I was like, wait, our moms are taking the time to do this for us. What can we do? So we continued making our regular ask, but then afterwards we do e-gift cards. So we send a thank you and heads up, an e-gift card is on the way, check your email. It's not part of making the ask because I didn't want anybody to then feel pressured to say yes to doing something that they might not that's what they want to do, but hey, that gift card they could make a difference right now, or so that's how we kind of worked around that in our minds, was how can we make it still we're not saying, hey, do this and we'll pay for it, how can we still do it in an ethical way?
Dia, one question I want to ask you is how do I'm thinking about a lot of nonprofits who have been past the 10-year mark. So they've been around for 10 plus years. I'm thinking of these longtime supporters and donors who are using language and using terminology that might not align any longer with decisions, right? With how you want to present your nonprofit and how you want to talk about your nonprofit. How do you have those conversations? I'm thinking, okay, so-and-so runs a peer-to-peer fundraiser and is talking about it in a way where you're oh no, but also keeping them, their heart might be in the right place, but their language is misaligned. What is that conversation in Jacina too? How do you educate that longtime supporter in a way that is this is what we're doing now, these are the changes, and have them not totally miss it,
Yes. So it comes down to relationships and entering the conversation with them with no assumptions. Like just because, this donor is an old white man does not necessarily mean that he just doesn't get it. And what I've found oftentimes talking to these older supporters who, in my mind, stereotypically are not inclined to be responsive to the kind of language that we're moving towards, I found that they're really excited to have something that they've been supporting use language that is new to them because they see it as a learning opportunity. And it's been a phenomenal experience because it's like, okay, well, we thought that this would make you less likely to be interested in what we're doing, just based on the basic principles of marketing and what kind of target messaging, is currently the best practice for what we're doing. But to have this response of, oh my goodness, please tell me more, I want to learn. And a lot of folks just adopt whatever language is kind of currently on the website too. So they're not, unless they have a really deep personal experience with the organization, a lot of folks before they create their peer, if they are going to do a peer fundraiser, they have to get approved. So we use Network for Good as our platform. And so if someone were to create a peer campaign, it would be through Network for Good and it would have to get approved before they could post it. So having, just those technical challenges so that the person can't just go off with your branding, I think is also a key to that. But having a consistent relationship and, being in a comfortable place to where you can pull that person aside and say, hey, this is not how, we're speaking about our youth right now. But usually there is a training or there is a conversation before someone launches a fundraiser like that. So we have a little bit more control.
You brought up a really good point, which is like, even in my question, I couched it in, we're going to offend them or they're going to be like, not wanting to hear that. And what actually I hear you saying is like, they actually might be more willing, Christina, than you might imagine. And so for anyone else, like, they might actually be like, thank you for telling me. I do love this organization. I have supported you guys for 20 years and I want to continue it. Thank you for bringing me into 2021. So that was a good reminder. And Jacina, I know I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, so we rely heavily on peer-to-peer fundraisers when we have like our annual fundraising campaign. And we have a whole like toolkit built out that has sample copy, text, emails, tweets. I'm like, let's just lay it out for everybody.
Yes.
Get easy, low lift. And then our messaging is consistent, concise, and it's on brand. But there's still some people that, will do their own thing. And we had it come up recently where somebody was speaking with a board member and they referred to one of our moms as the homeless mama, right? And so I get a text message of it and I'm like, this isn't my background. I'm like, I'm ready to fight. And so, but it's like, one, we always use one of our mom's names, a pseudonym, initial, based on their comfort level. So there was no reason, for somebody to even say that, because our mom's name, her name. And then two, it's like a person's circumstance doesn't define them. And it was really strange to see somebody who like really, really believed they were being helpful and like, yes, go ahead. Yes, hold on. Really believe they were being helpful and supports us, but like how easy it was to slip into like that power and that superiority complex. So it wasn't me directly, but it was as simple as being like, hey, yeah, so that's actually a dehumanizing language, and we try to like stay away from that. And those are like uncomfortable situations. Like that is room to grow. And it's room to grow, and everybody learns, right? Because now I know how to handle like a situation like that, and now this supporter also knows that like there's a better way to speak about people, there's a better way to say that. So like Dia was saying, like don't make assumptions, but sometimes it is like you're going to have to be willing to be uncomfortable and to grow with folks.
Yes. Amen to being willing to feel uncomfortable, because that is what creates the change, and being willing to say when you're calm enough and to not scream at that person, like, this isn't what we do. This is not within our core values. And what a light bulb moment for them. I'm sure that they probably said to themselves, well, I hadn't thought of it that way, or some flavor of that. Right. And so I think that is a really perfect example of how change is created within your organization, and then public facing, because that is a supporter, right? Okay, we're going to move on to another question. So this person says, my personal story is connected to the reason why I founded my nonprofit and the moms we serve. How can I share that as a part of our story without centering myself?
I say center yourself. Like it's okay. Stand in that space, because there's so few orgs where we, as the folks who are the target population, have come to a point where we can help to run the organization and provide that ongoing support to people like us. And it challenges the narrative of what nonprofits are and how they should work. In a lot of ways, when the folks who are being served are the folks who are serving. So I say stand in it, because there's not really a way around it. And it's really hard to communicate, at least in my opinion. It's really hard, and my experience as a co-founder, as someone who was directly impacted by the nonprofit that I'm currently serving it, even though I didn't found it. It's very challenging to communicate why what we're doing is super unique. It's not just an after-school program for girls. What makes us really stand out is the fact that we have youth leadership. I don't think anyone on our board is over 35. Like, it's, we're, and we want to have an advisory council. We want to have, folks who are currently students, telling their stories and being a part of the messaging and the day-to-day work of the organization. So it's really, if you are an example of success for your organization, I don't see any issue with, conveying that, because it's just going to be even clearer why, the work is so important, because it got you to a point where you are able to found, your own organization and stand in your own power, and you're showing other people how to stand in their own power. And what, that's the goal. That's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah, you're an example of the transformation, right? Okay, I'm going to move on to one more question here. Let's see. I'm working on an outreach nature project in a community where I don't live and I don't look like its members. All the grants that I find to fund this project eat up trauma and the saviorhood framework. Where can I go to find better funding opportunities that embrace a positive framework? Yeah, this is talking about sort of that systemic, like, this is what we need, right? Dia, I see a lot of nodding. Who wants to answer that one first?
Yeah, grants are hard.
Yeah, we don't even do grants, to be honest. Like, we today we just submitted our first actual grant proposal, like our first one.
So Jacina, are you mainly funded by individuals, or do you do
yeah, so we rely heavily on individual donations, and then community foundations.
Okay.
That we word of mouth folks are like, oh, here's this and I want to do this, but we've never had to apply or anything, go through a process. But yeah, community private foundations like that, we have received grants from.
Yes, and so it gets really complicated for us to, because we'll have a fiscal sponsor that still uses that kind of language, and they apply for grants on our behalf. We haven't gotten a federal grant directly, but we've been a sub grantee in the past. And especially with those federal grants, you are required to use language like at risk and underserved, because they literally don't know where to codify you. And so I would say that in those spaces where, especially if you really, are first starting out and things like that, and your organization is going to need those operational dollars, or like we have received funding for domestic violence work. And so, you literally have to refer to folks as victims because they were a victim of a crime. So, there are these nuanced instances where I'm going to say, there's not really a way to work around it because the system is not set up in a way to work around it. And if you can't access community foundation grants because maybe you haven't been around long enough, a lot of the community foundation grants require 5-year-old orgs or longer. Or they require you to have a certain fiscal capacity already before they're willing to fund your organization. Then, getting the funds from the state or from larger orgs that are requiring, you to talk about your population in a certain manner is honestly another opportunity in the future to help them reframe that work. So once you get funded, you can start to have conversations. So like we worked with I can't remember the name of the national organization, but they fund domestic violence work. And we were one of the rare orgs that had, community leadership, and had that youth leadership component. And so they had tons of questions for us. And actually when the grant application came out again, they were only wanting to fund orgs that had community led now. So just, being in the room and having that conversation with them, even though, we did have to use language that we don't use front facing to get the dollars. It's where a lot of foundations are at, and that's a whole other series. We can talk about and get some foundations to talk about, why do you not have grant applications in languages other than English? That we're serving folks whose primary language is Spanish. So, if I ever want to be in a position where I can leave this organization to someone who only speaks Spanish, how are they going to apply for grants without me? So how are you guys gonna move towards that? And so having those candid conversations with the folks that you are getting funding from and being like, hey, we didn't feel comfortable doing this, we did this because we felt we had to, and saying no to things that are outside of the grant deliverable. So if the grant doesn't require you to submit photos, letting them know, like, we didn't submit photos because we're not fans of taking pictures of poverty. Like, that's not what we do. That's not why we're here. So
I'm hearing like, get a seat at the table so you can change a table once you get there. And that's kind of what happened there, is like you got, and some progress was made that on year 2. So that's a really good reminder. So we're going to wrap up. I'm going to go through, I think I have one more question here. How has the policy guidelines changed for social media consent for the child as well as the parent? So I just want to say, like, I think what the bigger question is what's your policy, right? What is your social media policy? What is your marketing policy? So you definitely would want consent from the child's parent. I think what we talked about today is also like consent from the child. But really having a framework internal in your organization that is within your values. Do either of you want to speak to that? Okay. All right. So I think that we covered so much. I know that there was a lot to unpack, and I'll let you, Dia and Jacina, any final thoughts you want to share? I've got a couple of closing remarks for you, but just any final thoughts that you want to share today before we wrap up?
No, thank you for having me, though. Thank you so much for creating this space.
For sure. So, and Dia, anything else you want to share? You
just really quickly, if you're going to start to have this conversation, especially with your social media team, a great way to start is looking at your org's values and then creating a marketing persona that is for someone who is this new target person who's going to respond really well to the rewording of your messaging. Because if this is just to set you up to make a plan so that you don't have to feel so anxious about changing your messaging so much, and planning it out and knowing that this is going to be an ongoing conversation, an ongoing process to change your messaging is super important.
Yeah, this is being open to, like, this is an ongoing thing that you're going to revisit. This is not really a one and done, start and stop your social policy. So as a reminder, share this discussion. So you'll get the replay, share it with your friends, family, community, board members. Probably this would be great for you if you're listening, board members. Review your notes. I want to know what resonated with you the most. You can share that with us on social media. You can share it with me on email. Remember, we're really encouraging each and every one of you to support our panelists, the Tender Foundation. You can find them at thetenderfoundation.com or on Instagram @Tender, and Athena's Warehouse and athenaswarehouse.org. And I'm also going to have Courtney drop in the links in the chat one more time. And you can find Athena's Warehouse on Instagram @Athena's Warehouse. And just thank you, everyone. Y'all did great in the chat. We created a space that I really was hoping we would create, where we're really unpacking this. I think that there's so much more to it, so much more to unpack, but I think each one of us left with more than we came with so many more moments to reflect on than we came with. And I think that there's going to be a lot of both internal and like conversations happening. So Jacina, Dia, I'm forever grateful that you said yes to this. So thank you.